Welcome to today's IT Leaders keynote presentation. We'll get started in just a moment, but first I'd like to go over some quick info. First, a reminder of what comes with some of your subscription to it-leaders.org. You get live monthly web meetings, which I assume you know about because you're attending one right now. However, if you are ever unable to attend live, we do record and upload these for viewing whenever is convenient for you. You can get to know the other members, log in to see profiles, and we're glad to make any introductions. If you're wrestling with key issues or decisions, we strongly encourage you to reach out to the other members. It's very easy to post questions, and our community of fellow professionals is always happy to help. After each meeting, we generate summaries with key takeaways and learning nuggets so you can easily reference them and put them into action. There are many other benefits, but I just wanted to highlight a few. If at any time you have a question, please click on the slide and post it under comments. I'll open the forum for live questions at the end of the discussion. Now let's meet Dr. Leon Pinsov. Dr. Leon Pinsov is an internationally recognized expert in the fields of system science, information security, applied cryptography, computer imaging, and artificial intelligence. His list of accolades are longer than my arm, and we simply don't have time to go over all of them. So I will right now turn it over to Dr. Pinsov.
Good afternoon, everybody. And I'm happy to present to you. I don't know how many people on the call, and I don't know what is your background, and more importantly, what is your interest. So you have to bear with me because it's sort of totally blind presentation for me. I'm looking at my screen, but I don't know who's listening and what would you like to get as a result of this presentation. So I do not mind if you interrupt me. I don't know how your technical system works. So normally I use Zoom or Teams or some other application, and I can see people listening and I can see the reaction and we interact. But in this case, it's totally blind, so I apologize for that. I suppose that's how it's done with your system. Anyway, you can go to the next slide now.
And Dr. Pinsov, if any questions do come in, I will interrupt you and ask them, okay?
That sounds good.
Great.
That sounds good. So, since you are financial professionals or IT professionals, so I decided that we're going to talk about blockchain today. Blockchain is a tool, and this tool can be applied in many different ways, and I'm going to share with you certain applications of this tool, from Bitcoin and other applications, some in finance, some in supply chain. And then we'll talk about what we learned from that. Since this is sort of pro bono presentation, I apologize. Some of the slides I did not create. I borrowed them from different sources, so I just don't have time to create slides and work on my picture, so you can see that. And so that means that if you distribute this presentation or use it, you have to be cognizant of the fact that I borrowed some of the materials from other people. I did not create. Having that disclaimer, we can go to the next slide. I don't know how well you can see that. That slide was borrowed from University of Cambridge, and you can see this is a taxonomy of financial technology. So I found it useful. I probably don't know half of the applications here. You probably know better than I do. But as you can see, the inner circle, market provisioning, digital lending, digital capital raising, crypto asset exchange, digital custody, all these interesting new applications in the digital world for finance. And many of them can use blockchains as a tool. So you can use that. It's a useful thing. And you can research it further because the terms and the names of applications on this thing is clear. I hope you can see it very well. It's a small, but that's the way it is because lots of information on that. Go to the next slide, please. So in the digital world where we live, the most important thing is trust because, as you know, given COVID and other things that's happening, I'm talking to you, I don't see you, I don't know you, you don't know me besides that short introduction that Shelly gave. And the question is, can you trust me? It's an important question. Well, if you listen to me, you can probably check most of the information I'm giving to you, and that will give you some basis for trust. But if you try to transact some business, that may be more difficult because it's not clear what's the basis for trust. So we don't trust each other. The existing system of transactions in our world is built around centralized trust managers. So banks, stock exchanges, insurance companies, stockbrokers, a whole bunch of people, they typically administer interactions, transactions between individuals. And because they control the flow of information and control the flow of funds, they have an interest to charge middleman fees, and they have an interest to protect their right to charge these fees. And many people, particularly in technology community, and what we're talking about today is something which was invented and created in technology community, they wanted to see whether Internet, World Wide Web, and cryptography can actually enable other systems of value exchanges that would rely less on centralized trust managers. And so one of these is distributed ledger technology. It's somewhat broader term than blockchain. I will use it for now interchangeably, but in fact, this is a broader term than that. And it uses triple entry bookkeeping. So besides the known one, debit and the credit side, there is an entry into something that presumably is immutable, undisputed, and shared. That's called blockchain, or DLT. Go to the next slide, please. Now, if you look at the whole business of trust and how to organize transactions, you immediately will ask yourself a question: how much it's going to cost? And that cost of trust is an example of something that's known as a transaction cost. So think about that. If you want to buy a house and you need to hire a lawyer or notary or somebody of that nature to organize this transaction. In fact, that person does not build the house, does not build the appliances in the house, but it charges a certain amount of fees for transaction. That's called the transaction cost. The person who formalized and analyzed that in 1937 was recognized in 2009 by Nobel Prize in Economics. So the cost of trust is significant. And what we're going to talk about presumably reduces the cost of trust. Now, the tool that is used to enable that reduction, to enable blockchain, is called digitization. And so basically you can look at different forms of value, whether it's property type, music score, or something more tangible. You can digitize that and create either digital representation of that or digitally linked representation to physical assets. This type of process is called tokenization. So digital tokens are what gets exchanged in the present system of what we're talking about. And sometimes digital token can be made programmable, which makes it very exciting opportunity because, as you can see, you can make them smart. They can execute certain things and they can check certain conditions. And that's called programmable token. So there are two fundamental issues with the whole process. And that's very important to keep in mind. Number one, if you're trying to exchange any physical assets, the binding between physical assets and its digital representations is a huge and in many instances immutable problem. I'll show a couple of examples if we have time. And the second issue is that the tokens are created either by humans or assisted by some sensor-generated systems. And the result is that the data created by humans or sensors can be faulty. And if the faulty data is entered into the system of value exchange, such as blockchain, then the results can be disastrous. So digital ledger technology platforms have a promise of creating something faster, cheaper, and better, and we'll talk about that. Go to the next slide, please. So now I'm going to introduce you to a blockchain. Next slide. Next slide, please. So that's how it looks like. It's get a little bit, no. Before, go back. Yes, this one. So this is the setup. So you can think of a whole bunch of computers. Like right now, I'm in front of my computer and you are in front of your computers if you're watching this slide. So we have a whole bunch of different computers that are connected to each other. This computer is called nodes. The connection in our case goes actually through servers, and in this case it actually goes through Shelly server. But you can imagine something that is known as P2P, peer-to-peer network. And in this case, the computers are connected directly to each other. So we have that. Each of these computers runs the same type of software. It's called DLT software, whatever it is. I'll show you a couple of examples. For example, digital wallet. So each of these computers can send and receive information from all other nodes. And that may include transaction information. And each of these computers stores and maintains the shared copy of a database. So they all have the same database they share, and that database contains records of all transactions, all past transactions. This kind of database called blockchain. Now, the nodes on these blockchains are divided into 4 categories. The watcher is the simpler one, and I can be a watcher if I have access to the software. The doer, full node. The doer can transact with other nodes, can send information, receive information, and execute financial transactions. There's something called executive or miner. Those people can actually create information that other nodes cannot do. For example, bitcoins themselves. And finally, there's a very small group of people, maybe a dozen, that's called core developers, which maintain the whole system and enable everybody to have the same software. But you have to note that in general, the nodes don't trust each other. Go to the next one. So now, since you're a financial professional, I would assume that you're a little bit familiar with the mathematics. I didn't want to bother you too much with that, but this is so fundamental to everything that happens every day on every one of your machines. Hundreds times a day, this hash function gets calculated. So what is hash function? If you have a digital file, any collection of zeros and ones, and this collection of zeros and ones, bits, can be anything. It can be title to the property, it could be image of a painting, it could be image of the pair of shoes that you want to buy, anything, it doesn't matter as long as it's digital. The size doesn't matter, and the way it's presented doesn't matter. And this file can be processed to something called hash function. This hash function produces a fingerprint of that file. It has fixed value. In most of the cases that we're going to talk about, 256 bits. Creating and designing this hash function, it's very complicated activity because, as you can understand, any change in the file you want to hash, even 1 bit change, supposed to produce change in the hash value. That's how it's designed. But it's extremely useful mechanism that it's used every day by everybody. Go to the next one. So blockchain makes use of hash functions in the following way. There is a head of the chain which contains the address and hash value of the very first block, whatever it's in the first block. The block typically consists of the data and the previous hash value of the previous block. And then it gets into the data of the next block and hashed again, and then linked to the next block and hashed again, and so it goes. Go to the next slide, please. So you can see here block n minus 1 It has the whole block is hash, 256 bit, and it's represented in the top line called block hash, and it's in so-called hexadecimal notation, but it doesn't matter. Then it contains the hash value of the previous block. And then there is timestamp, version, some other technical information, and all the things you want, the payload, all the things you want, transaction information, anything you want in there. And when it links to the next block, it goes there via previous block, via previous hash of the previous block, and so on. That's how it looks actually to the computer. Go to the next one. So I hope that was clear, because that's really fundamental mechanism for everything we're going to talk about today. Go to the next one, please. So what's the Bitcoin? Bitcoin is an attempt to replace paper money with something that doesn't have physical representation. On this slide, you can see basic properties of the paper money. So the paper money are issued by the central banks of each country has independent central banks. Some don't. Like Bahamas, they use American currency, but most countries have their independent central bank that issues currency. And if person A wishes to give paper money to person B in return for some services, then the banknotes can be exchanged, and the person who receives that banknote or coin can examine that and ensure that it's valid, it's not counterfeit, and the double spending is simply prevented, because once the paper banknote or coin exchange hands, it cannot be double spent again by the person who gives it to the second person. So quite obviously. And the payer anonymity and payment unlinkability, which means that you cannot link the payment to the person, are provided by that. Go to the next slide. So the Bitcoin was an attempt to create something in the digital world, strictly digital world, which would replicate these properties. So the Bitcoin was created by this fictional purpose. Some people believe that it's actually Australian cryptographer, and he chose the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto in 2008. It's totally decentralized. There is no central authority. Except this so-called czars, the dozen people who maintain the system, but they're not really central authority, they just maintain the software. The system uses open source software, and it solves these two challenges that we discussed. So the coins creations are regulated by the system. And I'll show you in a second how to do that. And the double spend is prevented by virtue of the mechanism of Bitcoin. So anyone can use Bitcoin. You can do it today. You can download the wallet, digital wallet from this bitcoin.org, and you will be in business. And you can obtain also that by mining, but I'm sure you would not do that because it's a complicated procedure. Again, I'll talk about that in a second. Go to the next one. So each Bitcoin is divided into 100 million pieces. So in principle, they can be called satoshis. They can be very small in value. The Bitcoins become quite expensive. Lately, it's been close to $40,000 per Bitcoin. But if you divide it into 100 million pieces, so it's still relatively small value, and you can buy it in a small pieces, and you can exchange in a small pieces. So in theory, it can be, as I said, generated by everyone, but in practice, it's far more complicated. They create it at certain rate every 10 minutes, and the rate changes as the time goes by. But until about 20 years from now. So the inflation is protected against by virtue of the hard-coded limit of how many Bitcoins can be generated. The total limit that this Satoshi Nakamoto, or that Australian guy, put was 21 million. And that protects the system against inflation, but it creates some other problem. I'll talk about that in a second. Go to the next slide, please. So you can see why normal people would want to use Bitcoin. Well, I understand that some drug dealers and other people want to use Bitcoin because presumably it's anonymous and not traceable. Transactions are irreversible, but more importantly, transaction fees, that cost of trust is low. There are, however, many reasons not to use that because there is no ubiquitous acceptance. There are lots of speculation. The risk of losing is a serious business. When you obtain your Bitcoins, you have to remember your private key. Your system is organized through public key cryptography, and your private key is single number. If you lose this number, you lose all your possessions in Bitcoins. Go to the next one. So that's how Bitcoin is organized. There are these 6 items here. The transaction is really just like in any other system. It's transferring a coin or portion of the coin from one user to another. All transactions are visible to all other participants in the system. Anybody who has a Bitcoin knows all about transactions, and for that matter, the governments, the security organization, FBI, everybody knows about all transactions. We already talked about peer-to-peer network. So the blocks in this blockchain are built every 10 minutes and collected into blockchain, and the blockchain is shared. The mining mining involves 2 things. It's verifying transaction and compiling a block, that's mining, and also creating a new Bitcoin, it's also mining. And people who mine, they receive the reward, typically in new Bitcoins, and there are small transaction fees. Every time transaction is made, if I'm transferring Bitcoin to Shelly, that's a transaction. And I have to pay small transaction fee that goes into the miners. And the miners are the people who provide so-called proof of work. And in order to compile the block and receive the reward, the miner has to prove that it's really properly done, and the miner has the right to do that. And the way it's organized is a certain mathematical computational problem. It's called proof of work. And if the miner does that, everybody can verify that it was done, and then the block is created and appended to the blockchain. Go to the next one. So for miners, the incentive is that you can create these Bitcoins, and people normally do so-called mining pools to share their work. Why? Because mining is extremely computationally intensive. And that's, in practical terms, means not only time, but electricity. And so the mining of the Bitcoins nowadays produces as much electricity as the whole country of Switzerland on an annual basis. So that's how much electricity is consumed by the mining pools. And, well, we already talked about this. The blocks. Go to the next one, please. So the users, just like normal users, you and I, will accept the block if all the transactions in it are valid. So several transactions are compiled into the block, several transactions, and then they accept it if all the transactions are valid. That means that the user's software actually on your machine performs certain computation and verifies that the block is valid. And that's done by using this hash function. And the block serves as a public ledger. Okay, that's what we're talking about. Go to the next one. So it's readable by everyone, this block, writable by everyone, and it's tamper-proof. Means that the data cannot be edited and cannot be changed. I mean, data can be edited but cannot be changed, and that's the single most important property, of course, because actually it can be changed, but you have to change all the blocks. in the blockchain, which is impossible. You cannot change data in one block and hope that that will not be noticed. Go to the next one. So this is, again, mechanics of the transaction. Let's say that person on the left, on the top left corner, requested transaction. I would want to transfer Bitcoin for a service or a goods to another person. And so it creates a requested transaction. Then all the nodes are informed about that transaction, and transaction gets validated. And once it's verified, it goes into the block validation. In other words, each block containing a whole bunch of transactions is validated by the nodes by computing this hash value. And once it's validated, it's added to the blockchain, and the ledger is formed, and it goes on transaction complete, and the ledger is available for examination to everybody. That's sort of the process there. Go to the next one. I'm going to skip that in the interest of time. This is just a more textual representation on exactly what I just explained, and this one too. So you can examine that in your free time. You can see all the steps. Go to the next one. So this is basically the property of this blockchain. So encryption and immutability. Immutability is actually due to encryption and irreversibility of this hash function. Hash function cannot be reversed. Once you know the hash, you cannot recover the file that was hashed. The distribution through this P2P network, it's decentralized, and tokenization provides basic material for the blockchain and for the value exchanges. Go to the next one. So what is a smart contract? These things were invented relatively recently, maybe 10 years ago, by a gentleman in Canada. My friend was a professor who taught this person at the University of Waterloo. So smart contract is a set of rules. It's basically an algorithm that governs business transactions. It can be stored on a blockchain and can be executed automatically as a part of transaction. In other words, when I request a transaction and I send a block with a smart contract, then smart contract can be executed by each of the nodes. And so it can be contractual condition, for example, for, in this case, corporate bond transfer or anything you want, and travel insurance, whatever you want. All these conditions can be executed by smart contract. It's extremely useful mechanism that enables far richer environment for creating useful applications. Go to the next one, please. So, well, you can see this is the graphic representation of the same concept. The parties define the contract, and the contract, as you can see, this extremely simple representation of a flow chart. That's a contract. That's actually a computer program, flow chart of computer program. And that program is stored in a blockchain. Once the blockchain is accepted, all the nodes can execute the program. Go to the next one, please. So this slide is supposed to show evolution of the blockchain. So Bitcoin is 2008, and it's designed as a replacement for the money. Enterprise blockchains, and those may include actually smart contracts, they designed to deal with more limited applications like private consortia with the industry. So within the industry, you can create enterprise blockchain which would not be shared with everybody, only within the industry. And then you can have smart contracts and decentralized apps in a more general economy. And finally, smart securities in 2018 is something that it's still under development, and it's still going, probably it's going to change the industry we are in. Go to the next one. Next one, yes. Next one. So this is another view. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Yeah, so this is another view of this. So for the currency, you can imagine billions of users, anybody can use it, and technically everybody in the world can use it. It can maybe hundreds of thousands of users for different type of identity, ownership, membership, voting. It's called PEC services. Smart contracts would be used in the industry context, in the context of consortia. And it could be family trust, performance proofs, and also. And finally, decentralized autonomous organization, maybe thousands. So it's more limited type of blockchains, and they quite a bit more complex than Bitcoin, because smart contracts, additional information can be included in the transaction information. Go to the next one. So this is the list of applications I managed to compile in different sectors of the economy. So the first one is banking, financial services, and insurance. I hope to be able to show you a couple of examples of that. You can think about energy trading, because energy resources can actually be, if a couple of energy hydroelectric companies wants to exchange energy, they can be tokenized and can allow for effective secure trading of these tokens. In advertising and social media, you can control personal data via blockchain, because the personal data cannot be changed. You cannot spoof these things due to immutability of the blockchain. Food and agriculture is extremely important application. It seems like it's one of the more successful applications at the moment, because food supply and supply chains are a very hot area right now, and I'll show you examples shortly. Now, manufacturing and services, dispute resolution between contractors. I'll show you example from IBM how that works. And in real estate transactions, you can think about protection of different type of data that goes in real estate transaction from bad actors who may want to alter the records, change the records, and so on. Go to the next one. So in medicine, the application related to clinical data, and it's important that clinical data, once it's censored, whether it's X-ray or MRI or whatever it is, it does not change, and you can control who gets access to this data. So it's an interesting application. I used to have a slide for that. In the interest of time, I deleted that. Elections, we just went through those things. So you can think of tamper-proof and traceable voting. If every vote gets stored in digital ledger and can be examined by everybody with the identity, with some identity of the voter, then you can obviously secure the elections from fraud. Digital credentials is also getting to be a hot area, because lots of people looking for protecting credentials for access to different services via blockchains. Art is another interesting example. It's probably a niche example, but there is something called digital art. And the digital art can be effectively protected by the blockchain, but also provenance of the physical works of art may be important. Once the provenance is established, it's an important part of the art trading. The problem of linking, binding between actual physical work of art and its digital token is a huge problem, but we won't have time to talk about that today. And in developing world, lots of property rights, diplomas, all sorts of things that can be faked and are faked every day can be protected. Go to the next one. So, insurance is one example, and if you have uniquely identifiable assets, you can tokenize that, and then the token can be put into a blockchain, and it would be indestructible. You can't replicate this token, and you can register that in a blockchain, and that obviously would allow you to verify the ownership of the assets, trace transaction history, and so on. It's very useful property in lots of insurance applications. And, well, we already talked about binding between physical things. Any property, physical things, can be registered in a blockchain in terms of its ownership. And titles and those kinds of things. Go to the next one, please. Supply chain. So this, as I said, is one of the more important examples at the moment. There are three issues with supply chains: counterfeit, visibility, traceability, and efficiency. Well, we all understand what counterfeit is. You're ordering something, and it goes through supply chain, and you receive something different than what you ordered. It was deliberately changed or replaced. Counterfeit. You want to have visibility, traceability in case something happens. There is a problem. You receive wrong things, it's spoiled, it's broken. You want to trace it back to the source of the problem. And efficiency is really the cost of running the whole things. So go to the next one, please. So this is an example, farm to table, extremely important example of use of blockchain in supply chain. So you basically have IoT platform there, which is collection of sensors. You transporting food in a truck or on a plane or on a boat, and you want that food not to be spoiled. You have a temperature sensors, you have a pressure sensors, you have all sorts of things. It goes into that IoT platform, and it can go into the file. And so from farmer to processor, distributor, all the way to the regulator, in this case, example is a beef distribution. Every time your beef changes hands, in other words, the control of a piece of beef goes from farmer to processor, that change of control is recorded, and all the information about the beef itself, whether it's temperature, any other color, whatever you want, it's recorded in the blockchain. And that, of course, increases the trust in the quality and in the provenance of those things. You can also put some smart contracts into this system. So, for example, if the temperature goes beyond the accepted range, the smart contract can prevent further transport or further transfer of the meat from one player to another. And you can check the organic properties of those things. So it increases efficiency and revenue and allows everybody to examine really what's happening with those things. Go to the next one. This is a trivial, simple example how you can use blockchain in corporate voting. So you have shareholders, and the chairman distributes shareholder specific voting rights, and it goes to the shareholder electronically. The shareholder creates a transaction, and it goes back to the auditor. The auditor, just as the mechanism we discussed, validates the transaction, and then it goes into distributed blockchain. So all the shareholders can see how other shareholders voted on the proposition, whatever was the proposition, and it can be examined and it cannot be changed. So it's a fairly trivial example of use of the blockchain. Go to the next one. So I borrowed this slide. There's a large document that published by European Commission. European Commission is extremely interested in cooperation between 26 members of the European bloc. And that cooperation has a lot of issues because countries want to maintain their independent control, all sorts of things between them. And so they were looking for using of blockchains to simplify and improve this type of interactions between different countries. And this is an example of trade use case area, commercial finance. There are benefits and there are drawbacks of those things. Those are listed in this slide. Of course, the cost reduction, fraud detection, automation with payment, it's an obvious benefit. The drawbacks, however, extremely significant. The lack of standard, limited interoperability of this solution represents huge difficulty. In my years with the European standards, I was a member of several standardization committees. Finding acceptable standard that would be acceptable to all 26 countries that would be willing to adopt that is a difficult, thorny problem. And so blockchains are not yet over that difficulty. Go to the next one, please. Yeah, and you can see logistics, customs, administrative traceability, and transparency. Those are the examples. So customs are, you see, customs in the context of the European countries, customs are extremely important because there are no boundaries there, but there are different taxation systems, there are different rules with regard to what is taxable and what is dutiable, and all this harmonization and all these things is important. And then blockchain, in principle, can be used because of this mechanism, the traceability, transparency, and immutability. Go to the next one. So this is also from the same document. As you can see, on the vertical scale, you can see at what stage and at what industry is the concept. So at the bottom is the proof of concept, and at the top is market ready, can be implemented already. And the horizontal scale shows the impact of a particular use of blockchain in a vertical market, from low impact on the left to high impact on the right. And so you can see, for example, the cross-border payment system is almost market ready. It's in green, and it's obvious because the payment system is fundamentally computational problem. Payments are just changes in accounts, right? And it's computational problem. It's relatively easy to deal with them because you don't have to deal with the physical aspects of that. On the other hand, so-called decentralized marketplace is much harder to deal with because it deals with the physical object. So, well, and you can see all these different things. And shipping and tracking system is close to market ready because this we just discussed. Supply chain, shipping and tracking system is part of supply chain, and it's in relatively good form, and they see that as a being close to high impact area. Go to the next one. Well, this is the forecast for all these things, and as you can see, according to this company, it's called Factom, I borrowed from them, the largest applications will be in banking and financial services and insurance. And cryptocurrency will remain the second largest application, but supply chain and Internet of Things will grow significantly. Their projection is to $60 billion. Whether it's true or not, no one knows, but that's sort of the projection. Go to the next one. So what are the challenges? Blockchain has significant computational challenges because nothing comes for free. There is no free lunch. And you have to pay for the blockchain. And so it's highly computationally intensive. There is a high latency. You have to wait 10 minutes until transaction goes into the blockchain. Huge energy consumption as I mentioned. Dealing with fake block generations and outsorting fake blocks from the real blocks is another computational problem. So all in all, scaling that to large application represent significant technical challenges. Go to the next one. So it's just a repetition of what I already said. Interoperability, speed, privacy, obfuscation, it's a focus of research now. And people making significant progress on those things. But in my personal opinion, some of these issues are immutable, and that means we won't be able to solve them ever. But certain things can be improved. Go next one. So these are is there any real success stories and benefits? IBM is pushing forward blockchains with a lots of effort and a lots of energy. Why is that? You can guess. IBM feels that the blockchain may be their next chance. They missed the Google revolution. They missed the cloud revolution. So there are, Microsofts and Amazons and Googles, and IBM needs a big winner, and they're pushing that quite strongly. So they claim that the Food Trust is an open platform that IBM established, and any food producer can join that. And they claim that they reduce the traceability of product within the supply chain from 7 days to 2.2 seconds. The Global Finance claims that in the dispute resolution, they freed $75 million from $100 million stuck in reconciliation between IBM and their suppliers. Actually, IBM has thousands of suppliers, and the dispute resolution time reduced from 44 to 10 days. So that's actual data from IBM. And they claim that they can do worldwide facilitate settlements of cross-border payments. All these things are happening. Now, other examples are in Switzerland. There is an example when the real estate property was tokenized and put in the blockchain. And there are other applications here. I won't go over them, but you can see them too. Go to the next one. So what do we learn? So DLT is truly a clever tool. There's no question about that. And this, whoever it was, Satoshi Nakamoto or somebody else and some other people, they put fair amount of ingenuity into those things. But what's more importantly is that these blockchains or digital ledger technologies can be applied only to some very carefully selected applications. And you have to, again, we don't have time today to do that. That's what actually I do. I analyze application for the purpose of finding whether a digital ledger can be carefully applied to that. And you really have to look at all aspects of this application to make sure that it will deliver the benefits. Otherwise, it's not a panacea. And some applications simply not suitable for those things. Now, what you look at is something that I call controllable characteristics. So that's typically size and access to your network. How many entities would have access, would have actually this digital wallet or whatever is the software, the application run on those things. How many of them, how you control the access, what are allowed smart contracts, and most importantly, what kind of input data will go in and how you control the quality of this data. So it has to be really very vigilant analysis of those things to make it successful. But if you do that, you have a chance really to improve things. Regulatory issues can be sometimes significant impediment. As you know, Europeans have the new standard which deals with the privacy of data, and if you're not compliant with that standard, you won't be able to use blockchains. In other words, if it leaks or reveals information that is outside of GDPR, you're out of that. Cryptocurrency, bitcoins. So as you know, bitcoins reached about $40,000 yesterday. What very few people know is this: 97% of bitcoins are controlled by 4% of Bitcoin owners. And that means that trading in Bitcoins is significantly affected by the lack of supply. Only 4% are circulating, 97%, and the speculations is about. So if you remember a couple of years ago, the price went from $20,000 down to $6,000, then to $20,000. 3 days ago, it was $40,000. It dropped $8,000 to $32,000 a day. That's because 97% are not really circulating, and the trading is not exactly your stock exchange. And well, supply chain and finance seems to be the applications for now. I think that's it. So you can demonstrate my last slide. So that's my contact information. So I do work on those things, and I understand them. And if anybody wants to use my expertise, I'll be happy to look into that.
Well, Dr. Pintsov, that was awesome. I want to remind everybody that you do have a copy of just the slide deck. There is a lot of good information in there, so if you need to go and blow something up, some of that stuff had some small writing, so definitely go check it out. We actually have not had any questions come in. So, Dr. Pintsov, do you have any last closing comments?
No, I was happy to make this blind presentation. I hope it was interesting. I don't know. It's the issue with this type of presentation. If you don't know your audience, you don't know the level of interest and the level of technical sort of competence in those things, it's very hard to design these applications that they would be satisfactory to everybody.
Yeah. But as a layperson, I understood enough of it that I definitely want to go do some more research. So I am very pleased. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Really, really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
And
you're very welcome.
This recording will be up on the website by Monday, so anybody who missed it is welcome to come check it out. And Dr. Pintsov, again, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you so much, and thank you for paying attention to my somewhat not always coherent remarks. Thank you.
I enjoyed it. Thank you so much again for taking the time, Dr. Pintsov. Have a good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.